And for me, the wake up call was, even if I don't enjoy this initially, at some point, it's not about your enjoyment. It's about what is best for those around me. And am I doing the best for them that I can? And it would have been selfish to go, well, this is who I am. I'm going to keep pounding cheeseburgers. And in 3 or 4 years, I'm probably going to be on a gurney somewhere.
Do you believe that God wants you healthy? Then join me, Cersei Blue and Gigi Carter on the Healthy for My Purpose podcast, where we help you realize the relationship between your health and your purpose. We share how eating like Daniel can revolutionize your life. Through discussions and interviews, we challenge you to discover the powerful connection between plant-based nutrition, your body, and your faith. It's time.
All right. Welcome to Healthy for My Purpose. We are excited to have a friend back on our podcast. He's no stranger to you guys. We had him on before. We had a wonderful conversation. And we are back at it again. We have Shane Martin, which you guys know him as Shane and Simple. And so we are going to get into a conversation. He has some new things that are in the pipe that he's been working on that we want to share with you. And then we're also going to talk about faith, purpose, plant-based nutrition, all of the above. So you are going to enjoy this episode. Welcome, Shane. It's so great to have you back.
Wow, I'm super pumped. Thanks for having me. I was starting to feel a little self-conscious because I was like, we haven't talked in a while, and
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, no, I'm joking.
Well,
I'm joking.
Yeah, but you know what, Shane? We were doing that cook and chat every month, like clockwork,
Yeah.
and then it kind of we put it on hold. I think it started when we launched our book, and then we were doing some other stuff. So that was kind of how we stayed in touch with you. Is it seemed like every January we had you on cook and chat, and that's what kind of kept the embers kind of going. So
Yeah,
We'll
and I
tag
think
those cooking chats to this episode, guys, if you want to see it.
yeah, please do, because I would love to go back and watch them.
Yeah.
Because I think one of those we did in the little Airbnb we were staying in.
Yes, when we were renovating as well. I think.
Yeah, and then we found out by accident that we were all on the virtual plant stock together.
yeah,
Yeah.
Remember that? Yeah.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, with Rick.
So yeah, that was fun. So
Yeah, that was awesome.
I burned my hand on that episode.
Yeah. So I guess before we get into the faith and purpose talk, you have written some cookbooks that has blown us away. We have the first one. I know Gigi has it. I don't know if you want to get into the first book, but also unveil the second book and kind of catch us up to. I know we spoke about the first book on the last podcast, but catch us up how you got into the second one, how it's been going, and now that you are a cookbook author, how does that feel? How's it been going? Just get us all caught up.
Yeah, so it's interesting, and I if I've told you the story, you can just edit this out. I'm going to tell you again. So I guess about 2 years ago, right around 2 years ago, I got an email from a publisher. And when you're a blogger, you get all these emails from, we'll do your cookbook and you only have to give us $4,000. And it's like
gimmicks.
And gimmicks. And so you see those emails a lot, but he was very clear to say, no, this is not one. This is a legit publisher. I'm with this company. We're Harvard Press. And I was like, well, I know Harvard Press. And so I got on and I was like, I found him. I was like, well, okay, maybe this is legit. And he said, we'd like to talk to you about doing a cookbook. And that's pretty much all I read. And I sent back and said, yeah, they wanted to do a video meeting. And I basically said, yeah, sure. We did the meeting. And come to find out, I thought I was going to get to do a Shane and Simple cookbook.
Yeah.
They said, okay, this is a little different. We're not coming to you for your stuff. We have these, normally when you do a book, if you have a literary agent, you shop the idea that you want to do, and then you hope a publisher picks it up, and then you write that book. Well, they had already had what they wanted to do. They had the budgets. They had everything ready to go. They just didn't have the author. And so they said, we think you'd be a good fit for this. And they said, so here's the thing. It's a bread book. Part of me, I didn't say this out loud, but I'm like, what in the world makes you think I'd be a good fit for this? Like, I think I have 4 bread recipes on my website. Like, I'm not a baker per se, And they said, well, I said, how did you find me? They said, well, we just kind of put some keywords in Pinterest, and one of your recipes popped up, and we thought, oh, this is what we want. So they said, so you're a bread guy, right? And I just went, yes, I love bread. That's exactly what I said. I love bread. And they said, so would you be interested in potentially doing these? We have these ideas. We want to do an artisan bread cookbook for vegans. And then we have another one in the works that's with using a bread machine doing different breads. But we want to do the first one with the artisan breads. So I thought, and I said, you got to give me a couple of days to think about this, because I'm like, I've never written a book. I mean, I talked to Gigi when she first wrote hers, and I'm the most unorganized, non-administrative person in the world. So, but anyway, and I didn't know. I mean, like, I loved when I was in Europe or, in Charlotte, I love to go to bakeries and try all the breads, but I just don't like the time it takes to make them. I don't have that much patience, And really, baking is a science, It's So anyway. Long story short, I agreed to do them because it's like you can't pass that opportunity up, And so it really was a learning experience for me. But I think that's what they wanted was, this is not for professional bakers. This is for people that are at home that want to try something new. And so I felt like, so what I tried to do was I came to this book as somebody that didn't know anything about bread. And that meant me, like trying to learn as I go kind of thing. So one of my favorite recipes in there was that Swiss braided bread. And I learned how to do the challah bread with just 3 braids. I could do that. But when it required like 4 and 5 braids, I'm like, how do you braid, And so literally the picture of the baked bread was the day that I was watching a YouTube video, and I'd play it for 2 seconds, do one piece, and then play it, And so I was and so it was literally a learn as you go. And I think I started that book in February, and they wanted the manuscript to be in by the end of June. That didn't happen. I think I ended up, I think I turned it in September finally. And then Andrea towards the end, took time away from her clients, her graphic design clients, and spent 10, 12 hours in the kitchen baking one day so that I could she would bake, I would be shooting the final shots. And I mean, and I think maybe I told Joe, I can't remember, but in the last 3 or 4 days of shooting to meet the deadline to finally finish it, because they hired me as the photographer too. I think I counted it up over 3 days. I got 4 hours of sleep.
Wow.
And that was so when I turned the last shot in the next day, I was sick for 2 days because I hadn't slept. And so anyway, I turned it in, and 2 days later, when I had everything, they go back through the final edits. And so after everything was done, after every credit was installed, after they said, this is it, final manuscript, they go, so what about the second one? Do you want to do the bread machine book? And originally I said, absolutely not. No, I do not. And then I thought, well, maybe I have a little leverage. And so I just went back and we worked out I said, I can't do as many recipes. I can't, and fortunately they were kind of on board. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. And so I basically immediately picked up and had basically a couple months off and started on the second one, which was the bread machine book. So within a little over a year, I had 2 books come out, or I wrote 2 books. So,
Wow. Was the
so
second one easier for you? Like since you'd gone through
yeah,
the
this is it. This is it. It's the vegan bread machine. Yeah, it was. I learned a lot because the way that I did the first one is I did all the recipes, tested them, tried them, but I didn't shoot the shots as I went. So I had to go back and remake the things that I was going to shoot. And I think,
Wow. Yeah.
and so I think they wanted like 70 shots in the first book. So it was a lot of photographs.
yeah.
And the second one was about half as much. So that wasn't as bad. But I went through, and it was easier because really, and I want to tell everybody, and I tried to be as transparent. This was not a whole food plant-based cookbook. This was strictly a vegan cookbook. And so I really wrestled on whether or not I should do it because, my niche is the whole food. But pretty much, like I reached out to people we would all know in our area, and they all said, look, it's better than the alternative, and you're getting an opportunity to kind of, make a statement and be part of the movement and, just kind of, so there are oils, there's some of the vegan cheeses, there's some of the vegan butters, but we've made several of the recipes replacing those. And I think they figured that this was going to be more accessible for people in general because they could just go to the store and buy the vegan, but not everybody has learned how to adapt and so anyway, I did have to sleep on it for a couple of nights before I did give them a final answer, but I'm glad I did it. The breads turned out great. And then, what I was going to say with the bread machine, I had to buy a bread machine to do the second book, and so. But what I loved about that, what made it simpler, is that you could really go and the research consisted of you could go and see popular non-vegan recipes, and then you just kind of know how to veganize them. Like I can replace this with this. And then I would do little things like subtle changes if I wanted a certain type of seasoning used or something like that. But so that's what made it a lot simpler. It was like, like how do I make this jalapeno cheesy bread, and really it was just plopping the ingredients in there, setting them and said, see ya, But what I learned was you can do way more with a bread machine than just like you can use it. Like there were some breads in there that you use it just to knead and proof, and then you take it out and shape it and bake it. And there's several like jam recipes in there that you make with the bread machine. So, so there were elements like that I did not know you could do with the bread machine, but so it was definitely easier. And then I was able to do things like take a day and make like 3 recipes. And what I tried to do was make all the recipes that I went through as I started the book, and I kind of looked and tried because there were about half as many shots in this book than there were in the first one. So what I tried to do is just do a good mix of sweet and savory and alternative. And I went ahead and just said, unless the heaven and earth parts, and I hear a voice from God, I'm just going to shoot these recipes. And so I just kind of went in with that mentality. And then as I made them, I would take a day to bake them and then set those aside and then take another day to shoot those 3 recipes or something like that. So it ended up just being a lot less stressful, but because I see shiny things and my attention span is about that long, I still missed the initial deadline. So
It's funny, Shane, you say that. I mean, first of all, it sounds like you ended up like developing a process for how you would go about developing the second book, and it was partly based on your experience with the first. But as far as the shiny objects, Cersei and I were just talking about that. The term I heard is called shiny object syndrome.
Yeah.
where you're on a path doing something and then something kind of diverts your attention, and then you got to get back on path. So it ends up taking you a little longer.
Yeah. My oldest daughter, she and her husband live in San Antonio, and they bought a Rottweiler when they were still like right before they got married. and she was getting ready to graduate from Mississippi State. So she bought a Rottweiler or adopted one from a shelter and thought it was a mutt. Turned out to be a full Rottie, and they named her Dolly and love her. But I did not realize how clumsy and awkward those dogs are. They're just like big horse. They just go running.
Yeah, my sister had one too. She had Cronus.
Yeah.
His name was Cronus, and yeah, that is absolutely
Yeah. Yeah, they just kind of flop like they're lap dogs, and they're just, their heads are like this big, and they're like, if they butt into you, it just hurts, and they're trying to play, but we found out, that the reason they like their sense of smell is so intense, but they don't use them as police dogs because they get this. They have shiny object syndrome. They may be on the set, they go, and then they just take off. It's like they can't keep their attention, so it's like, okay, if I were a dog, that's probably what I would be.
Yeah, a Rottweiler, yeah. So in the book with the bread maker, do you, number one, tell me about is there sourdough bread in there? Like a recipe for sourdough bread? And then secondly, do you give recommendations for how to choose a bread maker for those?
Yeah. So one, I think there is a, it sounds crazy. I do think there's like there is a type of sourdough in there, I think, but it's not like where you have to create a starter. It's essentially just a simple, basic white type of bread, but it uses like organic, like even when I use white bread or white flour, I'll use organic unbleached and try to, because I know McDougall had a couple of recipes with that, so I feel better with that. So I tried to, where I felt like I could do good things, I tried to. There's like a basic white bread, and it was a take on like a sourdough. It kind of has that vibe. That's actually it on the cover right there.
Oh, okay, got it.
So you can see how the aeration and everything.
Okay.
But as far as bread makers, I ended up going with the Cuisinart. And I tell people, make sure it does a 2-pound loaf. Just because I think the majority of recipes tend to go that way, and it prevents you from having to do math, like to make a smaller loaf or something like that. But like I said, a 2-pounder, and it's, and that one that I got, if you go to Amazon, you can find it. And but the thing that I like about it is it has like settings. You can hit French bread, sweet breads, so that it proofs the right way. And it really is. I don't have to think about it. So I tell everybody, and I think I put it in the book, that these recipes are made using this type of bread maker. So you need to look at your manufacturer and see if they suggest, because some people's bread machine will only go up to like a 1.5 pound loaf. So,
wow.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about what you said about, like the vegan cheeses and the butters and whatnot. I think, different people are at different stages of the journey. And, having something for everyone, I think is really important, because to go, unless you've got a medical emergency situation, you're more inclined to let your taste buds drive the direction. You know what I mean? Whereas where if you've got a medical situation, you're just like, okay, I gotta go from, eating fried chicken and bacon to salads and no oil and, whole food, plant-based. Other people are kind of like, well, I noticed my A1C starting to creep up a little bit. I'm not type 2. I don't have type 2 diabetes. I'm not even have pre-diabetes, but I just noticed things are trending. I need to make some adjustments. And so, there's not that sense of urgency. And so I think having a book that kind of meets different people where they're at, I think is really important, because eventually they'll get there. Like when I first made the switch, I did go whole food. Forks over knives was my go-to in terms of like what I chose to eat. But it wasn't that I never ate vegan cheese or vegan butter.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was just kind of part of the journey. So,
Well, and I think too, I tell you somebody that kind of, like when I first kind of made that switch, I went pretty hardcore
yeah.
and still hardcore. I mean, I give myself permission on some things, but it's the exception. It's not the norm,
Right.
but I tell everybody, you got to know yourself. Thank you. I didn't want to get up and be rude, but my daughter made coffee and I could smell it, and I can't sit here in the room and smell it and not look at it. So,
Shiny objects.
so she was walking through, and I was giving her sign language like this. So, but I went to Omaha. I think it was last year, the year before last, to do the Healthy for Living conference or something, and Milton Mills was there.
Yeah.
And I got to sit down with him backstage for like an hour or in the green room. And of course, he was one of I loved him, like getting to follow him. And, when he talks to patients, he was telling me that he had a patient coming in and dairy was just killing them. Like, just the way they felt. And we all know that we know that it's not even for me, it's not even an argument anymore. We know that dairy is just, and I always tell people, they go, I can't do what you do, but where should I start? And the first thing I tell them is just ditch the dairy, just get rid of it.
Yeah.
And this was really affecting this woman. And he said, trying to guide her instead of telling her, you got to completely and he did, he said, this is going to be the best lifestyle for you. But he said, and cheese was her big thing. He said, just go get the vegan cheeses.
Right.
And she was able to eliminate the dairy. And so that aspect of her life and with how the issues because of that, she went to almond milk and she would do the dairy-free cheeses and the Miyokos or the Kite Hill cream cheeses. And it got her foot in the door. She saw the change. And so I tell people, it's kind of the same things with these books. If you can eliminate one major or two major things that can, yes, I'm not going to tell people these are health cookbooks, but because they're not, but they're less unhealthy than the alternative, and it shows you that you really don't have to give up holiday. And like, for the holidays, I may make some of these breads, because I have tons of family members that have no desire to eat like we do or like I do. So if I can put something on the table that I can enjoy, that they can enjoy, and that's kind of where I feel like it's a win.
But you also have some healthy breads in here too. I mean, it's not. It's a combination. Like I said, I think it just meets different people where they're at with their health journey.
Sure. And I tried to get a few oil-free recipes. Like the pancakes are oil-free in the first book. I think there's a couple of, maybe a muffin or two recipe that's in there. I think there's like a soda bread, or the cover on the book you have, Gigi, if y'all both have it, that's the Irish soda bread with raisins, I think. And so that was oil free. So there's a few recipes in there. So I tried to do it where I could,
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, we'll post the link of both books in the show notes. And so if you're curious, depending on what stage of your health journey you're on, you want to definitely check those out. So we're going to pivot a little bit, Shane, and we're going to talk a little bit about faith, purpose, plant-based nutrition, all of the above. The first question, just to kind of open it up, and I know we've shared it a little, but I think just to kind of hear your story a little bit is, how has your faith shaped your journey in this plant-based eating and the creation of Shane and Simple? How did that all evolve, and what role did faith play in that?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, just as I've shared the story, at the time, so this for me started about 12 years ago, and all of my kids were little. My oldest was 11, and then I had a newborn, all the way down to newborn. So we've got 5 kids, and so it had been. I mean, I was at my worst, 300 pounds, diabetic, heart, the whole thing. And so for me, it's kind of like when you look at the biblical model as a father, and how I think a lot of people. I was telling somebody this the other day. I mean, we are called to be the heads of our families, not as a dictator, but as the protector, the provider, to do what we can. And I always like to go back and say that, when you look at that whole idea of in Ephesians 5, husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church. Well, what did Christ do for the church? He protected and died for the church, and he was a suffering servant, and that's our example. So it's kind of like, am I being the best for my family and doing what's best for them? Because at some point, it really does come down to, I love the cheeseburgers and I love this, but is that what's best for them? And at some point, you kind of have to, that whole idea of dying to self and go, I've got to do this for them. And so originally for me, it just, and Andrea she didn't harp on me, but she generally was always concerned about, and for me, as a defensive person, I would say, well, naturally you're concerned because you're a stay-at-home mom and you don't want to be without an income. And that was just terrible, when all the time she's just like, I don't want to not have a husband. I don't want my kids to not have a dad around, and so I think, when it finally hit me of like, if for anything, this is more for them than it is even me, so I think there's that element of the faith side, but I also think too, there's that element of not abusing your temple. And it's like I tell people, like, I'm not telling you that it's unbiblical to not be a vegan or not be plant-based. I think it's odd that bloodshed was brought into the world because Adam sinned, and so his nakedness had to be covered, and that's but the fall interrupted in the natural order of things, and so it was about doing the best you can with the best you had. But we see in other cultures across the world, like the Asian cultures and things like that. Yeah, there are elements of meat that are part of their diet, but as a whole, it's not the main staple of their diet, And so I guess my thing was, for me, it's just, you realize how you're abusing your temple. And so for me, it was like, and I think I told you this, Gigi, maybe at one time, I remember the first 4 to 6 weeks in going hard, because I'm an all or nothing type person. I'm a black or white. I don't operate in gray very much. Wearing gray today, but and it's like Andrea will tell you, I'm either all in or all out. And so for the first 4 to 6 weeks, I was hardcore going, and I could tell the difference, and that's what kept me going, even when initially I didn't think the food was good because it was just bland. But we went out for Mackenzie. My 4th child, we went out for her birthday to a hibachi grill, and I had just a spoonful of rice. I had 2 or 3 pieces of chicken, and then I had some steak hibachi, very minimal amounts. And I got home and I told Andrea, I said, I don't feel good. And I just had minimal amounts. And the minute we got home, got in the yard, I vomited. And I thought, that's when I got concerned that do I have this gut infection, or and it was, I talked to, I've got a cousin who's a doctor, and he said, no, you just cut out all the mess. And when you tried to reintroduce it, your body just didn't like it. And so I think for me, that's when I went, why am I going to try to recondition myself to do things that my body just isn't wanting? Like, my body didn't reject apples and oranges and spinach and celery, and beans. And so it's like, that's for me, it kind of, that's when it was like, okay, I guess this is who I am now,
Yeah. So fortunately you had those 6 weeks behind you, or however many weeks of, feeling better and having a good runway. So it was almost like that point where you just kind of decided, okay, this is it, My body's
Yeah, and
telling me this isn't working for me.
and that's I kind of tell people, and I think you're like this, Gigi. I tell people, yeah, don't moderate this.
Yeah.
Like, just go all in, deal
Yeah.
with the first 2 weeks of things tasting bland. It gets
Yeah.
better, reset. Because here's the thing, you can always go back.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you can do that.
Yeah.
But if you get 2 weeks immersed and you just feel better and look better and sleep
Mm-hmm.
better, it's kind of hard to say goodbye to that. Whereas I tell people, it's like, well, I'm going to take the dairy out, and then I'm going to take this out, and then take this. I don't feel like you really experience the change. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? And so, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. That kind of brings me to my kind of my next question though about, Christians, because, Cersei and I have talked about a study specifically done at Duke University that Christians have like the highest rates of obesity and chronic diseases than the rest of the population.
Mm-hmm.
And, many Christians do struggle with balancing kind of their habits, their quote unquote traditions,
Yeah.
with a plant-based lifestyle. How would you approach that from like a faith perspective?
Yeah. Well, one, I definitely don't go in to say this is what God wants you to do, because it's like, I feel like legalism in a way is just as bad as legalism is just as bad, can come across as it's basically authoritarianism. And I think that's just as bad as complete and utter, what do you want to call it? Overt liberty, in a sense of, it doesn't matter what I do, it's like, and so kind of the way that I've approached it, and of course I get ribbed here being back in the deep South. In Charlotte, it wasn't a big deal. People would have they might have a laugh about it or something like that. Or, I remember one time our church in Charlotte that I worked at they were bringing awareness to the underserved in the community and poverty. And so they said, we're going to participate in the 72 hours of beans and rice to kind of, identify. And I'm like, well, I'm not giving up anything, you know?
Your normal diet.
Yeah. So I'm like, this is great. I don't have to give up anything. And so I think kind of the way that I try to approach it is, one, like I helped a church here locally that was starting off Fat Tuesday or Shrove Tuesday, and the church had a pancake supper. And they asked me if I'd bring my Blackstone and kind of participate. And I said, sure. So I did vegan pancakes, and mine were fluffier than anybody's there, and so and everybody's looking at mine, and they were as big as the plates, and like, and so, I try to just let it roll off my back. And, people around here make comments about how much grass I eat. They never, and like, or when they actually see what I eat, like they're kind of shocked. But I guess kind of to your point, I think what I try to do is, I think the reason that, one, church potlucks are the most unhealthy thing in the world. I mean, you see, and pastors are so overweight, the majority of them. And some of that's because people want to take them out to eat or whatever. But I think there's just this disconnect, especially here in the South, but I think in the church in general, there's this disconnect that, when they talk about how gluttony is not good and it's one of these seven deadly, it's almost like, well, I don't do gluttony, I'm very obese, but that's not because I'm and it's weird, because I do think there's this people categorize lifestyle things to say, like, well, here in the deep South, like, yeah, adultery is bad and being drunk's bad, but overeating, that Bible really doesn't talk about that, and so
Acceptable sin, like,
yeah,
yeah.
it's like what I have deemed acceptable, and so I do try to be careful, like the discussions never rise up. But what I do try to tell people is I try to I feel like my role is to kind of set the record straight, so to speak, in the sense that I think so many people, especially what I see in the southeastern part of the United States, when you start talking about being a vegan or plant based, I think the reason that they immediately put a wall up is there's this idea that that's what all these woke liberal nut jobs do. And so if I adhere to that, I'm inviting that into the church. I really believe that's kind of the thought process. That's because I've told you that's like when I first found out a buddy of mine had gotten healthy and had lost, and my buddy said, "Yeah, Thad went vegan." I'm like, I'm not doing that. Those people don't bathe; they eat bark and grass, and it's just not healthy, you know. And but that's just, but again, that was the shallowness of my thinking. And I tell people, watching Forks Over Knives, that's why I think that is the best documentary out there, because they didn't get into the hot button issues. Like, they didn't talk about climate, they didn't talk about animal rights and stuff like that, which all of that's important. We would never say any of that's not important, but they went to the science and they went to the health, and this is to preserve your life. And so when they did that and they made it all about the food, I walked away, and that I still remember the first thing I said to Andrea after that thing was over is I said, I think I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for me, and of course that's when I became a fanboy of Rip Esselstyn, but I think that's why I think it's so rebuffed, especially in this culture, is there's this idea that you eat tofu and grass, and you're like one of those California wackos, and and so I feel like kind of where I've kind of been able to be I think people are still shocked around here, not so much more, but they're like, when they find out like you're really a vegan or you're plant based, and they're like, but you're not pale and you're not skinny or sickly, and it's like, and I'm an old country boy, so I'm out building stuff and working on stuff, and and it's like, and I've told y'all, I relate to a lot of people here in some ways. I definitely am a thinker and think on myself and just feel like a square peg in a round hole, but I'm kind of all over the map politically, and then sometimes I align with people and sometimes I don't, and I think they feel more comfortable with me. And so I think when they see that and they go, oh well, he's not this weirdo, and he's not, so I think that's what I see kind of within the world that I'm in. I think there's this caricature, and so it's immediately rebuffed, because it's like, all I'm going to eat salads or whatever that tofu stuff is, and then it means I got to be weird, and we're not going to invite that into here, and it's like,
Yeah, and I think that kind of shows, because I remember there was a study. I think Dr. Greger does a video on it, and they actually did a study on participants in the South, just to bring up what you're saying, and they told them that they were going to do a vegan diet for 90 days or 60 days. I can't remember the number. And a lot of the people were not compliant. And I think part of it is because, like you said, they had this limiting belief about what it means to be vegan and all that other stuff. And so they couldn't comply. And so when they entitled it the Daniel fast, they actually had like a 90-something% compliant. Why? Because now they had a framework to actually identify with this way of eating. And I think especially, and I think this is why Gigi and I are so passionate about the Daniel fast, is that it actually goes against that limiting belief that you're talking about, especially people in the South. When you bring the Daniel fast to them, they're now seeing it in a context that relates to them. It relates to scripture. Daniel ate fruits and vegetables for a period of time. They actually integrating their faith into it. And so they were able to be more compliant, because you'll have Christians who don't even realize, and I didn't realize, I remember when I did the Daniel fast the first time years ago, I didn't even know it was vegan. I didn't even make the association. I was like, because I thought, yeah, vegans were just hugging trees, and, people who eat dairy are like, lost their minds. This is what I thought. I had that mindset. But when I was doing the Daniel fast, I didn't even connect. Wait a minute, you were just doing vegan, probably even more strict than the average vegan by doing the Daniel fast. And I think this is a great way, to bring the vegan diet in another language, because I think the culture has hijacked what does it mean to be vegan. Because it's true that it was a picture of someone that was probably, most likely, like you said, living in California, looked like a hippie, probably was white, like, all of these stereotypes of, animal rights only, whatever. Like there was a stereotype, not that is not a vegan, but there was a stereotype that locked in that this is what vegan looks like and this is the way it only looks. But there's many different pictures to what eating plant-based and vegan looks like that can incorporate other people's story, other people's demographics. And I think that's, the pleasure of kind of expanding what that word means to have people feel more inclusive with it and not so stereotypical. And I think that Daniel fast for us, we found is a nice bridge for that.
Yeah. And I just
I'm sorry, Gigi, go ahead.
No, I just want to add that, I think part of the issue is there are a lot more vegans out there. And I think that there are a lot of vegans who are quote unquote humble about it, where they just do their own thing and they don't let anyone know. And I think part of that is a little bit of a disservice, to other people who might be able to benefit from it. It's kind of like, well, I don't want to make any waves, or I don't want people to think I'm weird, or, but they're doing it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing. I wish more vegans, plant-based eaters would be more vocal about, what they're doing and why they're doing it. And I'll just say the second thing is I went vegan in Mississippi. I didn't go vegan in Washington State where I live now. And I would say that I have more options. I had more options, vegan options in Mississippi than I do where I live right now. I live in a rural area in the Pacific Northwest in Washington State. And you would think, that there would be vegan all over the place. Well, there's not. Like there's zero vegan restaurants where I live, like zero. And some restaurants have some vegan options, but it's few and far between. And, I still go to places where I'll try to modify something, even here locally, and they won't get it right. Like they'll throw some cheese on there or throw some dairy in it or whatever. And, and so it even though we're kind of saying it's in the Southeast and maybe, macro, that's the case. I think there are little micro areas within the South that are very vegan friendly, that are, very supportive of people who are trying to eat more of a plant-based lifestyle, especially in the larger cities, like the Atlanta, the Jackson, the Birmingham, Alabama, like some of those locations.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, I see the same thing, Gigi. I mean, obviously not around where we are, but it is amazing, like living up in this little bitty rural town. Like we have Corinth to the north of us and Tupelo to the south of us. And there's like a really good Middle Eastern place in Corinth of all places, and so I've gotten to know the guy that owns it. He's from Jordan, and I come in, and if I need something, like he'll take the feta out of something, or or he makes falafel, or we go to Tupelo and go eat Thai food, I mean, there is that. I will say Charlotte had a pretty killer vegan food scene.
Yeah.
And I miss that a lot, because that was like, anyway, it's probably good that I got away from it, but but I think too, kind of what Cersei was saying too, and what you were saying about how I think there are more in our area, but they just don't speak up much about it. And I kind of tell people, it's kind of like the people that say, well, I'm a Christian, but I'll let my actions do the talking. And I'm like, that's okay in some moments, but at some point when people ask you a question, just answer it. It's like I tell people, the problem is that it's Christians that have made the whole conversation weird. It's like we tell people, like when I was the outreach director at one of the churches I worked at, they're like, man, I just don't know how to evangelize or whatever. I'm like, just be a friend and don't be weird, And just be who you are, and like let your identity be in Christ, and just speak from that type of conversation. You don't have to. I used to say there was no uh there is nothing in scripture about the JPMs per conversation. There is no regulation on the Jesus per minute in a conversation that you have to mention. You know what I'm saying? So just hang out, be cool. But when someone asks you a question, just answer it. And I have found that once they get to know you and they trust you, and you just make it part of the conversation, like, yeah, this is every day. So, like, don't make people a project. And I think it's the same way with the whole idea of being plant-based or vegan in the church. It's like, it's like the old joke, a vegan, a CrossFit, and somebody else walks into the bar, and how do you know which one's which? And it's like, don't worry, they'll tell you, kind of thing. And I think that, it's kind of the same thing. Like, show up at your little potlucks, bring your own food, and when people ask, you can go, oh, well, I went plant-based like 11 years ago. I had these help, but like, you don't have to make it the main thing. You don't have to be the center of attention. But when people ask a question, be willing to speak up, and realizing it's not going to not make waves at some point. It just is. But be okay with that, because they're obviously okay making waves by bringing it up, and so, and so I guess that's kind of how I approach, because I enjoy confrontation, and I shouldn't. Like, conflict and I get along too well sometimes. So I try to have to dial it back. But when people ask, I'm just like, be cool, answer the question, and don't make it weird,
Yeah.
Like,
well, and I think a lot of times people are curious, but also maybe feeling conflicted. And so it's coming out in the conversations with the questions they're asking, or sometimes there's even teasing involved or whatever.
oh yeah.
Yeah. But I think there is something to be said about conflict and confrontation in a positive way, in a sense that, if you could come out of it both having grown from it, it's kind of a means to an end. I mean,
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, I didn't think about that perspective before, or whatever. So.
Well, and I think too, like, there's a couple of people around here, a couple of guys that are always, ribbing me, but we're good friends. But one of them has had open heart surgery, and he's my age, and he's a pastor. And my response is, when they make fun, literally, I'll shoot back and go, and the one that's had heart surgery is not me, the one who is got the big old porker right there. I can get away with that, but it's like, yeah, I'm fine. You go ahead and dig on me, but I don't have the big scar yet, and it's like, and like I said, that's not a conversation I would have with somebody I didn't know, but I'm like, when you feel like we're very close friends, and so, but again, that's kind of the truth, it's like, and for me, it's just, I'm not willing to go back to that, just, I've been there, done that.
Yeah. That's a powerful concept too, because I think sometimes, even in the church or just in general, it's seen as such an extreme way of living. And you just made a contrast that having heart surgery is extreme. But we don't see the extremities of the consequence. We see the lifestyle as extreme, right? And so it's really a mindset shift to kind of what's really extreme here? Is it being on medication for the rest of your life? Is it being on dialysis? Is it getting a heart attack? Is that extreme, or is it really eating plant-based? Which one is more extreme than the other? I think we've got it kind of twisted, and it's allowing us to not prioritize what matters, because we have it flipped a little bit. We don't see what's as extreme, and what's not extreme we're seeing as extreme.
Well, and I think too, it's like, you think about it, you look on television and there's a new drug every day for something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, something. and the side effects are always worse than what it sounds like they're dealing with, but I think we've normalized, like, at some point when something enters culture, and I heard a statistic the other day on a radio show where they were talking about, I want to say it was something to do with, there's been a lot of with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and he's always kind of been an advocate for. I mean, now he likes beef tallow, but I'm like, okay, bro. But like when he talks about, like, even before he had his position that he has now, I remember him showing like the box of Fruit Loops from Europe and the box of Fruit Loops from the United States, and it had all these chemicals and stuff. And then you look at the Fruit Loops from Europe, and it's like beet juice, vegetable coloring, things like that.
Carrot juice, yeah.
Yeah, and so, but my point is, somebody was saying that back in 1984, the number of health claims for something on insurance or disability due to health reasons, it was like, and I'm going to totally get the numbers wrong, but it was like a few 100,000 in the whole United States. Now it was like 50 million or 30 million, something like that. And kind of the whole point is, are there people in there that could be scamming it? Yes, but kind of the point, what I was making to with what Cersei was saying, at some point when you talk about the extremes, when you introduce something into culture enough and talk about it enough and just keep, it eventually becomes the norm. And I think that's why, like, the norm is, I'm just going to go get a pill. And nobody has a category anymore for reversal or remission or anything like that. It's, I just need to stave it off. So, and that's why I tell people, it's like, why do you see so many diabetics that are overweight? It's not the sugar that's causing their diabetes. And so, but they get on insulin and it regulates their sugar. So to them, that means I can still enjoy the same lifestyle. And that's the mentality, because we're treating symptoms. We're not really going to, well, we can fix this. There is some, or you hear people say, well, type 2 diabetes runs in my family. I'm like, no, lard and bacon run in your family. Or let's be honest, nobody runs in your family. That's why you have diabetes. That was terrible. Y'all got to edit that out. But I mean, that's the point. We've normalized the extremes. The extremes are now the norm. Like, everybody's going to have, blockages. So we're just going to have to do a bypass. Everybody's going to get on a statin. That's the norm. And so now this idea of, well, I've just got to cut this out. And I tell people that most people in the South don't realize, with just a very few minor changes, most of what they're eating could, just you eliminate or even reduce the meat product and just take the butter and the lard out of your greens or out of your corn, and you're already kind of eating that way, But that's another thing too. It's like, I remember when I saw Forks Over Knives, my dad had developed type 2 diabetes, and he had lost a bunch of weight, but his doctor did all the no carb thing. So he quit eating basically like the beans, the rice, and the corn and potatoes, and he was eating sweet potatoes and lean meats and greens. But I'm like, but then I see Forks Over Knives, and they're eat as many potatoes as you want, and that's what I did. And so I thought, well, man, if I can have potatoes, I'm good. Potatoes and bread, but I mean, think about that. A lot of people go, well, I'm going to have to give this up, and I don't really want to give that up. And I've seen more of that, of people going, hey, I just couldn't do that because I got to give up white potatoes. I'm like, who said?
Yeah.
And so I think there's like that misinformation too. And so, but again, kind of with what Cersei was saying and everything, I think just the extremes have become the norms. Yeah. Because that's just what we're introduced. I mean, you just don't. It's like, was it Gregor that said when he did the beef study, and he said the problem is there's no broccoli lobby,
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I'm saying? There's no asparagus lobby. It's the beef industry, the egg industry,
The
you know,
dairy
the dairy
industry.
industry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think too we're accustomed to the popping of the pill, like you said, so we're always looking for something that doesn't require any change on our part. It's
Or
just
effort.
or effort. So we're constantly looking for a prescription. Like we're wired that way now because it's like, okay, what? Just give me something that's going to resolve it. But so
Yeah.
we're not. So this idea of having to change our lifestyle, it's seeming too hard and too overwhelming. That most people, if you gave them, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of people would, if you gave them, you know, can I change the lifestyle and have no side effects? Or am I going to take the pill with the side effects? Some people are willing just to take the pill with the side effects because it you don't have to make a change. And I think
You don't have to give up your
you don't
vices.
have to sacrifice. You don't have to sacrifice
Yeah.
your vices. And so I feel like it's a deeper call to our vices. Like let's
Mhm.
get to the bottom of the bottom of the bottom, right? Of this whole thing, which is we don't want that spiritual growth. So I feel like for Christians, you are it's a matter of the heart. It's a matter of the
Mhm.
thinking. It's the matter of the self-control, which is a fruit of the spirit, that we are moving away from that, not realizing that what we're doing is that we are quenching the fruit of the spirit by saying, no, we'll just take the easy pill. Imagine if we did that with our character. Imagine if we did
Yeah.
that with the other fruits of the spirit. Where would we be? But we're doing that even with that when there's underlying character issues that are keeping us stuck with these foods.
Yeah. And I do think that I always tell people, you know, there's never just one layer to anything, you know, and I feel like that's kind of like the way we read our Bibles, or we read just the top layer and go, well, it means this. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, dig in, pull back the layers, see the history, see what was going on. How does this parallel from the Old Testament and the New Testament, you know, and things like that. But I feel like it's like that with this whole idea of how we treat our bodies, how we, you know, or I mean, think about it. If we confronted a lot of the detrimental sins in our life from the standpoint of, from the standpoint of, well, I'll just dabble with this a little bit, I'll dabble with this a little bit. And then when people confront you and go, dude, this is not okay, you know, there's this defensiveness that comes up. And it's like, as long as I can, it's the equivalent of, as long as I can maintain by hiding it and just staving it off a little bit. But that gets exhausting, you know, because you can never just rest and go, okay. And I tell people all the time, I don't have a problem, you know, if people come to me and we're talking about this and they go, I just don't want to do it to the level that you do it. It's like, so what can I do? And I'm not going to tell them, well, go away, because I'm not going to help you. I say, okay, here are some crucial things you can eliminate and try this. And you know, if you're going to eat an animal product, try to get away from the red meat, or you know, like, or just make your portion smaller but increase the fruits and vegetables around it, you know. And so I want to look for those wins of what's going to help, but at the same time, you know, it's I respect that way more than people are just. It's like you said, like, I'm just going to take a pill because that's easy, and it masks what's really going on. It you know, it helps the symptom for a little while until I have a sugar crash or my blood sugar spikes. I got to pop a pill to regulate that. You know, now obviously I have family that's type 1 diabetic, so their pancreas was just destroyed when they were kids, and so they're on medication or they're on pumps. There's nothing they can do about that, and that's not what we're talking about, you know. But there is way more in our control that is out of our control,
Right.
and so that's why I feel like, for me, when there is something, and again, I want to be cautious, because it's like with the type 1 diabetics, they don't have an option. They have to be on that medication. And, but with that being said, with like the things that we know are, and we know study after study, whether it's done by Harvard or the Cleveland Clinic or whatever, 86% of the diseases in America are lifestyle, are brought on by lifestyle. And so for me, if we know that it is a lifestyle issue, just saying I'm going to pop a pill, that's essentially saying I'm not going to own up to what's going on. I'm not going to take responsibility for it, And I mean, that gets into a whole nother thing of the healthcare system and things like that, and it's like, and I think it's become endemic of our culture in America, of where we are now, what I see, we're a very self-centered people because we've had it so good as a country in the sense that we want instant results. We're not marathoners, and I think that's what the medications do. It's like, I pop a pill, the symptom goes away, and I'm good to do this, but then it kind of comes up. And it's all about me. And we don't realize it never stays in our pond. It's a ripple effect. And so you can say, well, if it was just one person, that's one thing. But it's like Dr. Greger said, that's why birds, when you see ducks die of avian flu, that's why there's no pandemics among birds, because they just let the dead one fall and they keep on flying and go away. But we're not like that. And so it has this ripple effect. We're all kind of in the same waters. And so it's like, it affects your family. And then from out there, it affects the healthcare system. And then from there, it affects you know what I'm saying? It affects your traditions. And so it's never just affecting us or just in our little world. And I think that, and like I said, I don't want to make that a blanket statement, but really we don't see ourselves as communal creatures anymore. We've kind of become this is my island, this is who I am. And we were just never meant to live like that. I mean, and so, and I know that's probably going a little deeper about the issue than, but I do think a lot of the mentality and the way we approach things is, again, for me, the wake up call was, even if I don't enjoy this initially, at some point, it's not about your enjoyment. It's about what is best for those around me. And am I doing the best for them that I can, Yeah. And it would have been selfish to go, well, this is who I am. I'm going to keep pounding cheeseburgers. And in 3 or 4 years, I'm probably going to be on a gurney somewhere in my 40s, is that to me, that's selfish, that is so.
Yeah. I think at the root of it too, Shane, is that, food is controlling people. Like, people don't control food. Food controls people. And I think when you peel that onion back, there's a couple things that are at play. There's a food system that's, hijacking your palate to get you addicted to these foods. And then there's also a layer of, some kind of trauma, some kind of sadness, some kind of depression that's being masked with food. So finding comfort with eating food, finding enjoyment, because my life otherwise isn't enjoyable. The only enjoyment I have is, opening up that pepperoni pizza and cracking open a 6-pack of beer. And that's my enjoyment in life. And, and so I think there's that layer too. But I think when we look at it in relation to the church, what is so unfortunate unfortunate is not even the right word, but it's just, Cersei and I often say that Satan's secret weapon is toxic food in the church. Like, it's so accepted and welcomed and normalized and assumed, oh yeah, 4th of July holiday, we're going to barbecue some hot dogs and, stuff all these heterocyclic amines in these young children and start the disease. And, it's so normalized that there is just, people are just oblivious to what's going on. And, I think that the problem is so significant and so vast. Really, the only way to attack it is one person at a time, really really just, changing that one life to then, have that ripple effect, to see the benefits, to make the difference. I'm sorry, I don't want to go into like political talk or anything, but I do feel like, the church needs to wake up and see what's happening and understand what's the root of why this is, but stop making it funny, stop making it okay. It's not okay, and it's not funny. I mean, it's just not.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I mean, I think it's like at some point, it becomes not about being political. It's like, what is political about wanting to help people get
Right.
healthy? But what is sad, and what we all know, I mean, we saw, like, Andrea despises Monsanto. She just despises them. And when she started showing me how they work and I started doing it, I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, yeah, but look at when, several years ago, where they brought up a bill to do like they do in Europe, like to post these foods are genetically modified, they're GMOs, to call out Monsanto and stuff like that. It was the one time you can say that Congress was completely bipartisan, because overwhelmingly both sides voted that down. And why? It's because they're in the pockets.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, it's like, it's not funny, it's hurtful, and I guess that's the thing that gets me. And we've become so polarized to where, and like I said, like what you said, not to be political, but we've become so polarized that I can't take a stand on this because it means that I'm agreeing with this,
right,
and I could possibly become this,
right,
or I can't agree on this side because, and I'm like, at some point, I'm just like, no, that just means you can't think for yourself at some point. It's like, goes back to, it's like you're being controlled by something, and and I just. Yeah, I don't. That's what's infuriating to me. It's like, at some point, stop saying, like, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I was a RFK fan before RFK was cool. Like, just because obviously his diet, like, there are elements of his dietary lifestyle that I would not adhere to and would agree with. But nobody can make the claim the dude doesn't look good for 70 some odd years old. And I think he has some of the right things he wants to do with the red dyes and stuff like that, and he's calling them out. And I'll say, but my point is, it doesn't matter where you fall in political aisle. It's like, you saw that he got it from the right when he was spewing this, when he was talking about all this, and then he gets brought on board, and now the left hates it. And it's like, you can't win. You can't win, and it's like, because people get so polarized that it becomes about doing a right or a left thing, not a wrong or a right thing, and it's like, it doesn't have to be either or. It can be both and and I tell people, it's like, yeah, and this is why I love Dr. McDougall, God rest his soul. It just, for me, he was the rebel. He was just going to tell you what he thought. He didn't really care what, if your feelings were hurt or you were, to some extent. But I remember him talking about how he and his wife got locked out of their house. They had just moved, and they had come back, and I want to find the story, but he was locked out, and he'd already been doing this food thing in his practice for years. He was kind of when he was in Hawaii. But he said he and his wife were outside their house, and they were locked out, and it was around Thanksgiving, and they couldn't get in the house. And I can't remember the complete story, but anyway, a neighbor lady comes over to introduce herself, and they finally get in, and I think they're waiting on furniture or something. Again, I'm messing the story up, but the whole basis was this lady, their neighbor, came over, and as a gesture, brought them a Thanksgiving meal, like a whole meal. And he just laughed. He said, boy, that was the best Thanksgiving dinner I ever had. And he said, And he said, a lot of people got mad at me, but he goes, I don't care. I mean, and his whole point was every day is not Thanksgiving. This woman was being kind and compassionate. And he goes, what am I going to do? Tell her to take it back? You know, he goes, I didn't go crazy. I didn't lose my mind, but it was good. I'm not going to lie and tell you that it wasn't, you know. But the thing that my point is I think he was a good example of, he knew how to govern himself. He knew, you know, he knew what he believed in. He knew what he stood for. He practiced it. He preached it. He treated people with it. I'm sure in the beginning it cost him a lot of money as a doctor to see people get healthy, you know, but, you know, he was one of these guys that he didn't major on the minors. And you know, one thing that Andre and I have talked about, which if you go on a McDougall Facebook page, it's his followers that tend to be the majoring on the minors. Like, you're missing everything he said, you know. It's like, yes, he said, don't add this, don't do this, you know, think about this. But I feel like McDougall, as stern as he could be, and is just put it out there unfiltered sometimes, and just very bold. The thing that I loved about him is I still felt like he was very gracious. And he always said, like, I don't know if you remember GG, the last plant-based immersion we did in Jackson, and he did the Zoom in call or whatever. Mm-hmm. And he said, look, when you have those vegetables, add a little salt and sugar, you know, don't go crazy, but add a little flavor to get you over the hump. He said, salt and sugar, they're definitely not the good guys health-wise, but they're not the thing causing all the issues, mm-hmm. you know? And he said, if you can get to the point where that's all you're adding, you know, he said major, and that's what I loved about him, you know? And so I feel like we could really kind of learn, we would do well that's in our area to kind of, in our sphere of influence, you know, kind of take that lesson, because I kind of feel like that's the issue of, like, it doesn't have to be either or. It can be a both and. And if, you know, if people say, well, I enjoy my July 4th cookout, and I'm like, hey, go enjoy July 4th. Just don't make the next 3 months July 4th, you know? And that's what McDougall said. He said the problem is too many people don't know how to give themselves permission because they can't govern it. And that's why I always tell people, when you go into this, the biggest thing you can do for yourself first and foremost is to know who you are. Mm-hmm. Know your weaknesses, own them. The worst thing you could ever do in any relationship with yourself, with food, with people, is when you mess up, is not own it. Mm-hmm. Just, yeah, my bad, because you don't know where to go if you don't own it. You don't know how to get better. And that's why I love Dean Ornish. He said, hey, if you have a bad day, just do better the next day. Mm-hmm. Like, don't live in it. It's done. There's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. Yeah. You can, Cersei and I often talk about, you can literally hit the reset button with your next meal. Like, you don't even have to wait till the next day.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
yeah. Because at the end of the day, it's not what you do here and there. It's what are you doing on a regular basis as a lifestyle. That's what's going to be darker. Sometimes we can get caught up, like that one bad meal that we ate. That's not what is making the health epidemic. It's not the one bad meal. It's the fact that we are doing this chronically, breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day. And so it gives us grace for those slip-ups, because it's not the slip-ups that's going to define us. It's going to be, what are you doing consistently?
Well, it's a cumulative thing. It's like making an F on. It's like making an F on one test. It's like, are you going to focus on that, or are you going to focus on what ultimately the end result is going to be as a whole? You know, but I think too, as you get to know yourself and you investigate and you learn and you dig, you know, I don't know if y'all remember this. Have y'all ever read the Engine 2 Diet, like Rip Esselson's first book, the very first one?
I haven't read that one. No. Mm-mm.
So I meant to ask him when I was on his podcast, and I wish I had off camera, but in that book, you know, he talked about this in Forks Over Knives, where just one day, because he was talking about the number one cause of death for firefighters is heart disease, like in the line of duty, because they're so unhealthy sitting around the firehouse. but he said, and he talked about this in the book, but he said they decided one day to kind of have a game because he was doing triathlons and, that kind of thing. And so he was really fit anyway. And he had been adhering to like a plant-based diet to sustain him for his endurance and everything. So wasn't new to him, but he said they had decided to kind of do a contest and go have their cholesterol checked and see who had the highest. And that's kind of how the old Engine 2 thing started. But in the book, he said one of the guys that was on there just blew away, but he said, it sounded like he said that he had just finished a race. And after each race, because they were spread out, he said he would have his post-race, he would still have a cheeseburger. Like that was the only time he would do it. And he said his cholesterol jumped up after one meal. Mm-hmm. And he said that's when it hit him like, okay, I don't really want to, he never did moderation, but it sounded like that was the only time he would ever allot himself that. And that was in the book. And he didn't really divulge on it. It was just that. But he said after that, because it became aware to him how we say, oh, what we do like right now doesn't have a huge effect. But he was like, no, it really does. And we saw that in like Game Changers, where they took the athletes and showed the blood and everything and showed that even the types of the fat, like the avocado fats, didn't register like the animal fats. And so, I think it's important. Like, we can always hit the reset button, but I think at some point it's so important to know that what you're doing, even sometimes the immediate, like, there's very few things that don't have an immediate effect, and I always thought that was interesting that he put that in his book.
Yeah. Well, Shane, I want to switch gears just a little bit and go back to kind of your journey. And the question is, have you experienced any specific God moments in your journey? Like from the time, that you kind of were aware of your health issue up through today? Like, were there like specific God moments that you can point to that clearly led you or affirmed the work that you're doing?
I don't think there's just been, obviously I would say the biggest moment was when, and it was a scary moment, when Audrey and I finally sat down. I still remember it. We sat down at a little coffee shop bakery in Mint Hill, North Carolina in 2019 around October. And the blog was about a little less than half of my income at the church. And we just finally said, I'd been in ministry for 15 years and I loved it. I never really saw myself leaving it, but I loved, after going plant-based, I always thought I'd love to do what Rick Esselstyn does, talk to people, because I do. I love to talk to people. But I think, the biggest kind of cornerstone moment was when we sat down and we had that conversation, because we were talking, do we continue this as a secondary income, because it's a real good secondary income right now, or if we want this to be full-time at some point. It's kind of like what you did, Gigi. You quit your corporate job, got your master's, and said, okay, I'm going to do this thing. I don't know where it's going to go. You just kind of, but we sat down and she had our budget and she said, this is the absolute minimum we can make. And this means that we just get our bills paid and there's no extra left. And I think for me, it was like, oh, so it's possible. And that was a huge thing for her, but it just showed me how much she really kind of believed in me with it. And when, one of my pastors I used to work with, he said, when your wives bring up something, you really need to listen, because he said that they're the closest thing to the Holy Spirit on earth you're going to get. And so it's, and he usually communicates through them. And I think when she had sat down and run the numbers and looked at everything, and she said, basically what she was saying was, we're either going to do this or it's just going to continue to be a side income, and it'll be a great side income. But if we're going to do this full time, we're just going to have to jump ship and do it now, and like any small business or whatever, anybody will tell you, you've got to be willing to work full time for part-time pay. And we looked at each other and we talked, and it was just it was one of the most surreal moments, I guess. I mean, I still remember the table we were sitting at. I still remember the coffee I was drinking. I still remember the atmosphere, the classical music that was playing through NPR, their station. And it was it was like the setting was just perfect for that conversation. And so I think it was clear. And I tell people it sounds trite. I always, when I figured you could make money on a blog, I always wanted the blogger lifestyle. There's a lot of work that I was not prepared for. But I mean, I love doing it, obviously, but I tell people all the time, the greatest thing for me is I love getting the comments, and I love talking to people, and I still get emails about people saying that my site was what helped switch them over, because, if you go and look at my recipes, they aren't the foo-foo salady stuff. They're whole food, they're plant-based, but they're a little more indulgent, some of them. And my goal is to kind of help these people kind of usher in and get their foot in the door. And there's one family, and I won't bring their names up, and I still get emotional talk about them, but they reached out and they put their whole family. It was a husband and a wife and 2 kids, and the kids were slightly overweight, and the husband and wife were overweight. And they started, and they said my website was their go-to. And they are just the picture of health now. And every year, they call it their vegan versary or their plant-based versary. Every year, I get a notification from Venmo, and they send me $100 and say, you and your wife enjoy. And it's just their way of saying thank you. And I tell them, you don't have to do this. And they say, you are a part. It's like they say, you're a part of our family. And, and I see things like that. And I do, those are the things. So I wouldn't say there's one moment, because it's like every week or every couple of weeks, there's moments, and for me, I love the perpetual moments. And I do tell people, I know it sounds trite, but I don't know. There's just, I do love that aspect of it. And really, for me, it is about coming alongside and encouraging people. And I would say when it hit me really hard, and this would probably be one of those God moments, when I went to Omaha, I think last year, the year before last, to speak at the Healthy for Living conference. This was a big conference. I mean, and it was fun. And just had a blast. And that's where I met Milton, and, had some heavy hitters there, and Ella Majors was there, and got to know her. And so I wasn't speaking until later in the day, and was doing kind of like a cooking demo. And, but our hotel was the conference center, so it was connected. And so, I ended up sleeping in a little while, catching up and working on some stuff for the blog. And it's interesting, because when I'm taking a long way to get to tell the story, but I like giving people background and stuff like that, and you can edit this out. So, but anytime I travel, and if I'm not with my wife or my family, I'm a people person. I'm an extrovert. And if I'm in a cool city, I'm going to go do stuff. And I kind of like the time by myself to just go sit and read, or sit at my computer, or go grab a coffee somewhere. But if I'm in a hotel, I kind of enjoy just being in the hotel room, like going and watching every basketball game that I can find. And it was during football season, so I was watching football there's uninterrupted. And so I kind of enjoy those things. And so I got up, went for a run, came back, got ready, and the conference had already started that morning. And I thought, I had the schedule, and I saw they had a break right after mid-morning. So I thought, well, I'll go over, catch the lunch, and just kind of see a couple people and catch up and just walk around. I'd like to see the convention center. And the first day started that I got there, I had gone for a run, and I went over and saw Ella Majors. They were taking us out to dinner, some of the speakers. And I go and I'm standing in line at the little sundries store, and they had a Starbucks in there, and I was just going to get a bottle of water. And so I come in from a run, and I'm standing there and I'm talking to Ella. She was grabbing a water or something, and there were 2 or 3 people in line. And I noticed they kept turning around and looking and looking and looking. And finally, it appeared to me what they were doing. And they came up and they said, "You're Shane, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then they just start telling me their story. And then, they asked for an autograph. I'm a blogger. I'm not a movie star. But, so, that was cool. But anyway, what I was going to say is the next day when I go over to the conference center during the break, I walk in and I walk across the breezeway, and there's just all these people. And I just start noticing people start talking and stop, and they're pointing and they're looking and they're talking. And then ends up, I'm taking all these pictures with people. And I'm just like, you don't realize the impact that you have on people, and that's why I tell people, never sell yourself short, because just because you don't see these people doesn't mean they don't feel like when they come up, it's definitely not bugging me. I love it. I love to talk to people. And it's like, because they are the very reason I get to do what I do. It's their clicks that allow me to do this for a living, and it's impacted them, and so that would totally be one of those God moments, not from a stroke the ego, but just go, oh wow, people really feel helped and encouraged. And I would have to say the last one, and this is definitely more than you probably bargained for when you asked that question, but last year I was in Asheville doing music for a conference, and it's like I had 10 minutes of music that morning, and then I did 10 minutes at around 7:00, and I just had the whole day. So I brought some friends in from Charlotte to play with me, and so we play in the morning, and then we hit Asheville and just spend the day in Asheville. And Asheville has an amazing food scene. And one day, a buddy of mine, one of my best friends from Charlotte, we went to the Jerusalem Cafe in downtown Asheville. And if you are a vegan, there is no better place to go and eat. I mean, it was just, they make it fresh. I mean, the hummus, the baba ganoush. I mean, so I did the vegan platter. And I'm going to tell you, it was one of the few times I stuffed myself silly that day. But it was like, anyway, we get done eating and we're just chilling out. And the weather could not have been better. It's got about 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 o'clock. So there's nobody hardly really downtown, and school's back in session. And my buddy Paul and I found this really cool bar, very small. There's like 3 people in there. We go in, we sit at the bar, and there's a couple about our age sitting down next to us. I get up, go to the restroom. We have one of their local brews, and we sit there for about 45 minutes just catching up, the 2 of us. And I said, "Are you about ready?" And he said, "Yeah." So after about an hour, and I get up, go to the restroom. I come back, and Paul's talking to this couple. They're from New Jersey. They're there on a long weekend, and they have grown kids that are in college. And so we keep talking, and I introduce myself, and I'm Shane, and he, and they said, "Well, it was great talking to y'all." And we said, "Y'all have a great trip back to New Jersey and everything." Paul and I leave, and we get about a half block up, and then all of a sudden, I hear this voice going, "Wait a minute, are you Shane and Simple?" And I went, "Yeah." And she goes, "I knew it was you. I knew it was you." She said, "It was too much of a coincidence." I said, "This guy looks familiar." And when he said Shane, I just had to ask. And they come out, and her husband said, "She is like your biggest fan. She's been following." She goes, and she's like, "Can I get a picture?" And I was just like, "Yeah, I mean, you really want to?" Like, I still like, "You want to?" And so we talked for a little while, and she shared her story with me. And I really do love the stories. And I said, "Well, message me so that I know, I can keep in touch with you." And so they go back in, and we talk for maybe 15 minutes, and she just thanked me for taking the time to talk to her. And And she told me, and this was the biggest compliment I think anybody's ever got me. She said, she goes, I follow a lot of bloggers, but she said, I don't see their personality in what they write. And
Mm-hmm.
she said, you're just like you write. And she said, that makes me so happy because I was afraid you'd be a big jerk, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And so we walked off, and my buddy Paul starts laughing. He goes, dude, I've known you for almost 20 years. And he said, I've never seen you in your celebrity, you know? And we just kind of laughed. And I was like, I think that's stretching it a bit. But, you know, those are moments that make me go, okay, maybe what we're doing is, it really is worth it. You know,
Yeah.
I believe it's worth it, but like, I don't know. It's still kind of hard to believe I am able to eke by doing
Yeah.
this, you know?
Well, it
So,
sounds like you're walking in God's purpose for your life.
I think so.
Yeah.
Like it was an unexpected purpose, but
Yeah.
so, and y'all are too, obviously. So,
Final question. What legacy do you hope to leave, not just as a food blogger, but as someone living out their faith through your work?
man, that is it's a hard question. Well, I say it's a hard question. It's, you know, at the end of the, I mean, you know, I think a lot of people would probably expect me to say, oh, I want to be remembered like the Esselstyns or Dr. Campbell. You know, I guess as a person of faith, that'd be okay. But I don't know. I think it's more important to me that when I am gone, that the way my kids would talk to their kids about me and then my great grandkids, whoever they are, you know, I mean, just that, because we had a lot of, on both sides of my family, a lot of broken marriages and infidelity. And I love my mother, I love my dad, and my mom was just an incredible woman. And their marriage just was, I mean, later in life when my mom got sick, my dad really kind of turned a corner. But we saw a lot of broken marriages. And so I think for me, the blogging is great. I love helping people and I love that people are encouraged, but I always tell people it's like if it was causing my marriage to suffer or, you know, it was hurtful, I'd have to quit it. Like there's not there's no sense of, there is no balance is what I like to say. You know, it's not like one weighs against the other. It's like the marriage and the family. This is, and I'm a bit by nature, a very self-centered person, which I think we all kind of are, but I'm a very domineering leader. So there are times I just kind of strike out and go without considering the consequences. And it's made me a great repenter, you know, but I have to do that a lot. But I just think first and foremost is that I would just like, I would hope they would say he had a lot of faults, but he owned them and he recognized them and he would repent and try to do, you know, but just, I think at the end of the day, the legacy would have to be, what are your children and your children's children going to say and remember about you and pass down to the coming generations? And I think for me, and I've said this and it sounds trite, but I want to be one of those people where 4 or 5 generations down, great great grandkids, great 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 grandkids, oh, your great 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 grandfather did this for a living, and he was this type of man, and you know, this is why we are who we are. Like those are the things that are, like I said, I love the blog. I mean, I love doing it and love helping people, but I don't think it would be as effective if I didn't have the support and those, you know what I'm saying? And it was because of my wife and my kids that I ever moved into this. Because without them, I don't know that I would have ever done it. I think I would have just continually headed down a detrimental path, you know? So for me, I guess that would be, yeah. Do I want some sense of the healthy and, to be a part of my story. Well, it is part of my story, and it's my story now, but I don't think it's the main story, you know? And so, but I hope that it's in there somewhere. He was this weird artistic blogger dude and did this, you know, but at the end of the day, it's, you know, how the coming generations will talk and the stories that are passed down.
Yeah. But what a blessing it is to do what you do, but also help your family in the process, and
Sure.
have a lifestyle where you can kind of do this stuff together, you know?
Oh yeah.
It's such a blessing to do that, and helping other people in the process.
Oh, for sure. And I do love the fact that when we first moved here, and even now, like when my kids went to school and their friends found out what Andre and I do for a living, you know, she's this freelance graphic designer and your dad's a food blogger, you know, like it's nobody around here does those things.
Mm-mm.
And so, you know, that's just stuff they kind of hear about. And so, you know, to hear them say, yeah, your parents have cool jobs, or they do, you know, and one of the teachers in their school just, you know, talked about how out of the box that our kids think, and, you know, and stuff like that. And I love that. And, you know, we're starting to see it just as they grow into life, and they look at world events, and they look like they come to us for advice, but they're developing their own sense of who they are, and they talk to us about things. And, you know, and I feel like we try, I hate to use this term, but we tried to teach them not to be Kool-Aid drinkers, you know, like, and realize there will be consequences for that. There could be consequences from us for that. Like, not always understanding.
Literally and figuratively, no Kool-Aid drinkers. Yeah.
What? Say that again, Cersei.
I said literally and figuratively. They're not Kool-Aid drinkers. That's a good one.
Yeah. Exactly. That's exactly right. So.
Awesome. Well, Shane, thank you so much for being with us. Any parting words, or we'll include all where people can connect, but people already know where they can find you, but we'll do that. Any
Sure.
parting words you want to wrap up with?
No, just I'll say it every time I'm with y'all. And Cersei, I haven't got to meet you like personally yet, but it's just,
I know.
you know, Gigi and I always talk about our short time of like getting to interact, but it's just one of those where we pick up where we left off. And I feel kind of like that with you, just because of your connection with Gigi. But so I love any chance that we get to do something together. And I think we need to do, something of a cook and chat on my side, and let me kind of guide it and get in y'all's head and see if you can get through. Get through the recipe. I think that would be awesome.
Hey, you set it up, we'll be there.
Okay. Okay. I think that would be awesome. I think it would be awesome.
Thank you for joining us on the Healthy for My Purpose podcast. We hope you enjoyed the community and are walking away empowered and encouraged to live your healthiest life for your God-ordained purpose. You could connect with us on Facebook and Instagram to enjoy fellowship with like-minded women. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this on iTunes. Until we meet again, keep honoring your body for your purpose. Want to lose weight? Comment yes, and we'll send you our free masterclass.